Radical self-acceptance is a major part of the spiritual awakening journey. In fact, spiritual development and radical self-acceptance go hand in hand. But, newsflash, you need to go through the process of self-acceptance not once, but twice during awakening. And that's because as you wake up, you fundamentally change as a person. One of the hardest things during my spiritual development was learning to accept myself. I had to accept the person I was before my awakening, who was not always nice or good. And then I later had to learn to accept the person I really was as I shed my ego and rediscovered my true soul nature. In a moment, I'm going to talk about these two periods of radical self-acceptance in more detail. But first, let's explore what radical self-acceptance is. We know what self-acceptance is. It's making peace with the person you are and the things that you've done. But what makes radical self-acceptance radical? It's radical because it means making peace with yourself, even if that self is contrary to societal norms. It's being able to accept and love yourself, even if you've done some horrible things, without feeling that you must change or improve to be accepted. And I'll talk a bit more about that at the end of this video. But importantly, radical self-acceptance ultimately leads us to radical acceptance, acceptance of others, the non-judgmental ability to love all beings, no matter who they are or what they've done. We might not like their actions, but we learn to love the actor, even if they're Donald Trump. And that might sound crazy to you, but try to think like an ascended master. What did Jesus preach? Forgiveness, love, compassion. That's radical acceptance. But this video is about radical self-acceptance. So let's talk about why you need this practice in the early stages of spiritual awakening. It's a fact of life that highly evolved souls who are scheduled to awaken in this lifetime will often have a difficult start in life. In fact, in the survey of spiritual awakeners I'm conducting right now, 3/4 of the people who took the survey said they suffered abuse in childhood, some of it very serious, and a whopping 90% said they suffered a traumatic event. That's huge. And by the way, if you're awakening and you'd like to take the survey, I'll leave a link in the description. You'd be really helping me out, so thank you. Now, as I'm sure you know, childhood abuse and trauma profoundly affect our course as adults. They have a massive impact on our self-esteem and can also lead us into self-destructive behaviors like drug and alcohol abuse. And excessive use of those substances can also cause us to not always be a nice person. And I know because I was a functioning alcoholic for 25 years. So it's not a stretch to say most awakeners have a lot of issues to deal with, and guess what? Resolving them requires practicing radical self-acceptance. Now, most of this work takes place in the first stage of spiritual awakening, resolution, which is when we start untangling our trauma and our issues. But this kind of deep inner work can actually continue the entire way through awakening and even beyond. I'm going to tell you something that will help you accept yourself. You were set up. Whatever horrible things happen to you in your life, 99% of the time, they were planned. Any character flaws that you have were designed. And that's because, firstly, we're supposed to be different and have weird and uncomfortable bits to us. We experience every flavor of human personality as we progress from life to life. Some of them are going to be harder to inhabit than others. Secondly, we come to Earth to overcome challenges. It's a learning environment. The fact that your challenges were so huge is testament to the fact that you're a higher evolved soul. We're only given as much as we can deal with, and you can cope with anything, even if you don't always feel it. So who set you up? You did. You chose this life, knowing that you would have a whole heap of things you needed to untangle to get through your spiritual awakening. And the fact that you're doing this, thank you, is helping the collective learn how to guide people with different types of life experience and different personalities through their spiritual awakenings. You're taking one for the team. Recognizing that is the first step on the path to radical self-acceptance. This life, your personality, were meant to be. If you stick around to the end of the video, I'll share some tips on how to practice radical self-acceptance in the early stages of awakening. But now let's talk about radical self-acceptance later in the awakening journey, once you've shed your ego. By the way, if you're finding this video helpful, please click the like button so it can get to more people who need this information. What do I mean when I say you shed your ego? Some people call it ego death, but I don't like that term because, firstly, we always retain at least part of our ego, at least 5%, because it's what makes us unique. And secondly, the ego is a really important part of our overall system. It performs great service for us, and we shouldn't want to kill it. Put simply, the ego is the collection of beliefs that we start to gather about ourselves from the moment we're born. It creates an identity for us, which helps keep us together until we're in the later stages of awakening. That's when we have access to our true soul nature and we no longer need the ego to identify us. So the irony is, having invested a serious amount of time in accepting the construct that the ego created for us earlier in awakening, later we become aware that that's not who we are at all. And in fact, 45% of the awakeners who took my survey have clear memories of past lives. And that fundamentally changes how you see yourself as a person. You realize that you are not just the human avatar you find yourself in during this lifetime, but that you have a rich history and limitless experience gathered during many lifetimes. Another thing that can happen in the later stages of awakening is that we're visited by some very senior souls. Now, here's a list of the entities that the people who took my survey say they've interacted with during their awakenings. Michael the Archangel, Lucifer, the Virgin Mary, Mary Magdalene, Jesus Christ, Krishna, Vishnu, Shiva, the Prophet Muhammad, Buddha, God, and the Great Mother. Now, these aren't isolated incidents. The data that I've got shows that it's very common. But that sparks a question. Who are you if souls on this exalted level are guiding you? The fact of the matter is, if you're awakening now, you're higher evolved, and you have probably lived lives which came into contact with these beings, maybe even very close contact, perhaps a family member or a friend. So having just got our heads around the fact earlier in awakening that we're not a terrible person, in fact we're fine just as we are, we now need to learn to accept that we're a very old, very powerful soul, and it's a head twister, that's for sure, and it requires radical self-acceptance. To achieve that at this stage of awakening, the best thing you can do is meditate and look deep inside. Do you trust what you're intuiting or being told about yourself, your true self? If yes, then you just need to catch up to the idea. And you can do this by using regular affirmations such as, I am a very old, very powerful soul who is incarnated in this life to do something important. But if not, then ask your guides for more information or consider something like past life regression hypnotherapy so you can gather more evidence. Now, what about the techniques I promised for radical self-acceptance in early awakening? First of all, I want you to write a list of all of the good things about yourself, the things you've accomplished in your life, and all of the people who have your back. Keep the list nearby, read it every day, and when you're feeling low about yourself, because this will build your self-esteem. Then, when you feel stronger, write a list of all the bad things you ever did as you see them. Go through the list and analyze, why did you behave that way? Were you going through a tough time? Did you lack good role models when you were growing up? Is it learned behavior? When you dig deeper into the actual cause of your actions, you'll almost certainly find that you weren't really in control, but a victim of conditioning. One last thing. Radical self-acceptance does not mean that you can't focus on self-improvement. Forgiving yourself for the past doesn't mean you can't aim for more in the future. The head trick you need to pull off is investing in your personal development because you want to, not because you feel that you should. I hope this video about spiritual development and radical self-acceptance has been useful to you. Please hit the subscribe button and the bell notification for future videos about the spiritual awakening journey and how our universe really works.